Hi, folks. Welcome to the Prepared Homestead. This is Travis. Thank you all for stopping by to watch. So I wanted to make a separate video on this issue because I believe it does have the potential of being a Black Swan event, of being something very catastrophic to our system, especially in regards to something we've talked about a whole lot lately, and that's the CBDC, digital dollar, that kind of stuff. You know, a lot of people are talking about it, but one of the big questions remains is, how are we going to transition to that? What are they going to do to cause us to transition? You know, a lot of people say, well, it could be, collapsing dollar, hyperinflation, all these possibilities. But the question, is still out there. Well, what's going to happen? What is it that could happen? This one issue that I want to talk about today, I believe, has the great potential of being that issue. And while I don't fully understand all the technicalities of this, I'm going to do my best to try to explain it in layman terms, but I will also leave a link in the description below of another YouTube video of a guy that has much greater knowledge than I do, and he explains it actually quite well of exactly what this is. But what I want to talk about is how this could be just absolutely devastating to everything. Now let's switch over and see what that thing is. So this is something we've talked about now for about 10 days. It came out about 10 days ago, and most of you probably have seen this. The FX swap debt of $80 trillion blind spot, BIS says. So everyone's like, okay, that sounds scary. 80 trillion. Anytime there's a number of 80 trillion, that sounds really scary, but we don't really know what this FX swap debt is, and most people anyways, don't know what a BIS is. And so I'm going to do my best to try to explain that and tell you why I think this is a big deal. But first, let's just get on with this BIS. What is that? Well, that's the Bank of International Settlements. So let's go to the all-trustworthy Wikipedia. And, of course, my picture is blocking the view. So let's This could be one of those days. Okay, I understand that's really bad English, but this is possibly one of the they that we talk about when we're referring to the Bank of Central Banks. It's 63 central banks. I mean, there's no doubt that this Bank of International Settlement wields a lot of power on the global scale. Okay, so that hopefully get you to understand what they're doing is they're facilitating transactions and stuff between central banks. All right. So going back to the original FX swap debt of 80 trillion. So the 80 trillion, we'll just set that one aside for right now. Let's look at this FX swap debt. So the best way that I can describe it is and it's a blind spot. And so we'll get to that in a second too. The FX swap debt is transactions between U.S. and international banks and between U.S. and international or outside of the United States companies. And if you go to the Bank of International Settlements, they refer to, of course, U.S. banks and then non-U.S. banks, which is outside the U.S., and then non-bank entities, and then outside of the U.S., non-U.S. non-bank entities, which those are companies. It's such a weird way of putting it. I really think that these people do this and word things this way so that the average commoner doesn't understand it. And when they don't understand something, they just kind of blow it off. And I believe that's why this headline right here, while at first it's like 80 trillion, and then you read it and you're like, what does that mean? And so you just kind of, it leaves your brain, and then we think about stuff that Elon Musk is doing, or, Biden or Trump or whatever. But this is huge. So FX swap debt, what that is if you have a business, a company in Germany, and you have a company in the United States, and the company in Germany wants to do business in the United States, and they need to take out a loan in the United States, but it's difficult for them because they're a German company, and if they're a foreign company takes out a loan in the United States, they are charged a much higher interest rates, and vice versa. You have a U.S. company that wants to take out a loan and do business in Germany. And because they're a U.S. company, if they take that loan in Germany, they're going to pay a much higher interest rate. So these two companies work out this deal. And so the German company takes out money in Germany. Say it's $10 million. I'm going to use the analogy of the video that I'm going to share in the comments. So the German company borrows $10 million, or francs or whatever. And because they're a German company and they're borrowing it in Germany, they get a lower interest rate. And then the company in the United States does the same. They take out a loan for $10 million, and they get a lower interest rate, and then they swap that money. Okay? They swap that money. Now, this is actual liabilities, okay? So they're taking out a loan for whatever that amount is, so that becomes a liability. And typically in bookkeeping, that you would list that in your bookkeeping as a liability, that you have this $10 million liability. For whatever reason, companies, banks, central banks aren't putting that on their books, okay? So this company in Germany could have $10 million or $100 million in loans that they've taken out and they've swapped with this company in the United States, but they're not putting those loans on their books. Okay, so it's liabilities that company has, but it's not being shown on their books. Okay, so that's the blind spot that it's talking about, and that's what this debt swap, the FX, meaning that they're transmitting this through a banking entity that swaps this money for them, okay? So that's really, really, really dumbed down version of what this is. And the problem is, part of the problem is that when a company takes on debt, okay, and they show it in their bookkeeping, they show that they're this much in debt, it can affect their value, okay? So if this company over here has $1 million in debt and this company over here has $100 million in debt, the odds are you're going to want to invest in the company that only has $1 million debt versus $100 million debt. And so because there's all this debt, this 80 trillion, and it's actually more than that, but let's just say for right now, $80 trillion, it's very possible that stock prices have increased improperly because people haven't been aware of how much debt the company that they're investing in actually has. Okay? So that's the blind spot. This is debt that these companies and banks have that no one really knows about because they're not listing them in their bookkeeping by saying, oh, yes, well, we have this 100 trillion or this 100 million or this $10 million in debt that we've swapped out with another company. They have the debt, we have the debt, and we swap it. This is a problem. So this is a debt that no one has had in their purview. When we think about how much debt there is in the world, we think about how much debt a particular company has, or how much debt the nation has, or how much debt a bank has, or an individual has. It's much, much, much larger than what we knew. And that's what this is. Now, the Bank of International Settlement did not say $80 trillion. Whoever wrote this and released this, they read the report and like, oh, it's $80 trillion. It's actually more than that. If you add up the U.S. banks, the non-U.S. banks, the U.S. companies, and the non-U.S. companies, it actually totals around $100 trillion total. Now, the 80 trillion is in US dollars, I believe, is why they're coming up with the 80 trillion. There's 20 to 25 trillion dollars in this type of debt in other currencies, okay? So the 80 trillion or approximately that is in US dollars, and then the rest of the makes up around 100 trillion is in other currencies. This is absolutely staggering. Here is a report from Bank of International Settlements. If you can see right up there in the corner, Bank of International Settlement, BIS.org. And it kind of breaks it down. There's more on their website, but I'll be honest with you, it gets really technical, and it's probably for the non-bookkeeping accounting person. It gets a little bit, like non-U.S. banks, non-banks. So this is companies outside the U.S. owe as much as 25 trillion in missing debt, up from 17 trillion in 2016. So in just a few years, so in like 6 years, they have increased their debt by almost $10 trillion. Non-U.S. banks owe up to $35 trillion, and it just keeps going up and up and up. And I believe, if I can remember where it is, down towards the bottom, it kind of starts summing it up. Like I said, it's a lot of numbers. Here we have the $85 trillion. Okay, here we go. Considering all currencies, outstanding amounts at the end of June of 2022 reached $97 trillion. So on all currencies, $97 trillion. So almost $100 trillion in global unknown debt. This is debt that's not being reported. Almost $100 trillion in debt that's not being reported. Okay, here's the $80 trillion in outstanding down here towards the bottom. See this right here in the middle of the screen. The 80 trillion plus in outstanding obligations to pay in U.S. dollars. So that's the 80 trillions in U.S. dollars. The rest of it is in other currencies. Okay, so I guess it's 17 trillion. In total, 97 trillion. This is astronomical. And here's one of the reasons why this is astronomical. Is because that most of these, and this goes into it, it's very technical. Most of these types of loans are fairly short-term loans, 1 year, 2 year, 5 year loans. And so if you take all of this almost $100 trillion in loans, and let's say it was a 1 or 2 year loan, most of these loans as of right now most likely would have been taken out before the interest rates went up. Back when interest rates were 2%, 3%, less than 2%, all that kind of stuff. And now with the interest rates going up to, 7%, 8%, somewhere 6, 7, 8%, depending on, what it is, maybe even more, the debt or the payment on these are substantially more. Because remember in the beginning we said that the German company, they didn't want to take out a loan in the United States because they would have to pay a really high interest rate. So they took it out in their country under a low interest rate and swapped the money. Well, now, even though they did that, interest rates have gone up. And a lot of these are like balloon payment type loans. And so if they took out, $10 million in loans at 4% interest rate, so the interest on that would be $400,000. Now it's gone up to maybe 8%, and now they're going to have to pay $800,000. So it's an amount that they were not planning on paying, and because there's so much of it, the possibility of in 6 to 12 months, companies and banks and stuff going bankrupt, going under, because they cannot afford the amount of interest. That's why over the last few months, you've seen even the United Nations, the World Bank, and all these other, big entities saying to the central banks, hey, let's tone down the interest rate hikes. It doesn't mean that they're not all in cahoots, because they are. But this is quite possibly the thing that causes the U.S. dollar, because this is 80 trillion. You see this down here? 80 trillion in obligations to pay in U.S. dollars. That's more dollars than are in existence, folks. So it wouldn't even have to be all of this, going bankrupt. but 80 trillion is more than US dollars are in existence globally. Okay? More than US dollars in existence globally. And if these debts start collapsing, they're not able to do this. If all this, they have to pay the piper and it all comes due, it's quite possible that it could cause our dollar to collapse, especially when you add to it things like just this week. It was another article of confirmation that China will be purchasing oil from Saudi Arabia using the yuan and gold. Basically Saudi Arabia is taking the yuan from China and then converting it over to gold, and so it's in other words, it's eliminating the U.S. dollar, and we're seeing this in other things. India is purchasing from Russia without the U.S. dollar. There's oil being sold and purchased. I think a few other Ghana is purchasing oil in gold and not U.S. dollars. So it's happening a lot. We've been seeing the weakening of the U.S. dollar, and now the potential. And I'm not making predictions. I'm saying the potential collapse of this FX swap debt in the neighborhood of $80 to $100 trillion. Even if not all of it collapse, even if 10% of it collapse, let's just say 10%, that's $10 trillion in debt that collapses. $10 trillion. That's significant. That's like a third of all the United States debt. $10 trillion, even if it's 1%, $1 trillion. It's a lot. It's an astronomical amount that's not being reported at all. And then the fact, like I mentioned in the beginning, all these companies, if this starts coming out of who these companies are, if anyone starts digging in and start exposing who these companies, so let's say you've been putting stock into a company because its stock value is high because the company's worth a lot, and then come to find out they have $100 million in debt that they weren't reporting, what's it going to do to the stock value? People are going to whoa, I don't think I want to be investing in this company as much as they have an extra $10 million or $100 million in debt that they're going to have to pay at a lot higher interest rate now because rates have gone up. This is very serious, folks. And while I'm not making any predictions or promises or anything like that this could be the Black Swan that causes us, for them to say, oh, well, we just have to reset everything. We're kind of in a reset now, right? We're in a reset, so we got to reset everything. We got to just reset our currency. We're just going to wipe that out, reset it back to zero. And all these companies now, this $100 trillion in debt and $32 trillion in U.S. debt and all this other trillions of dollars, it's just too much. We cannot pay it off. It is not feasibly possible to pay off, all this debt. The world just can't do it. I mean, there's more debt than there is money in existence. It's not possible. So let's just, zero out the accounts. We'll start all over. And to fix this problem, we've got this new digital stuff. And that way we can control the inflation of it so that the inflation doesn't skyrocket. We can control the interest rates way better. It's just a better deal all around. That is a very likely, very possible scenario. Not saying it's going to happen, but it's possible. And again, I could be totally wrong. I'm not an economist. I'm not at all. I'm a pretty good math guy. I'm good with numbers, always have been. And if I sit there and I play with it enough, and I get it, the numbers and stuff, I can kind of figure it out. All right. And so that's what I'm trying to do here. But it looks to me like it's quite possibly being a scenario is being set up. The stage is being set, like the chessboard's being set up right now. We've got this talk of this 80 trillion, all this other stuff. We'll see how this goes. But it's quite possible that they're setting the stage so that 6 months, 12 months, whenever it is down the road, the whole system, not just the U.S. dollar, because if you've noticed and watched this channel for any length of time, it's not just the United States switching to digital stuff. It's virtually the whole world, and all the countries that are at odds against each other are all doing it. Ukraine, Russia, China, Taiwan, North Korea, South Korea, United States, Europe, Africa, Australia, all of them, South America, all of them. The whole world is switching over to the digital. Well, this 80 trillion and actually 97 trillion is a global thing. It's a global thing. It affects everyone, every country. And so if it goes under, then it's going to cause the whole planet. And then we have this global money system, all digital. It's easy to transact between nations and banks and central banks and companies. And it fixes all the problems, folks. Don't worry about it. It's possible. Don't know, but it's possible. And I want to give you a heads up so at least that's in your mind. And as it's potentially we'll see more and more stuff out about this over the coming weeks and days and months and all that kind of stuff, and we might actually be able to understand that this is when this is going to happen, or get an idea before it hits us. Anyways, the bottom line is it's time to get your houses in order. Prepare yourselves mentally, physically, and spiritually. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.